After our divorce, my wife turned my entire family against me and kept my daughter away for years. She came to me as an adult now, and I gave her the truth about her mother. I never intended to tell this tale in public, but I feel compelled to do so in light of all that has transpired. It has been quite the roller coaster over the last few weeks. Perhaps someone can tell me whether I'm the real villain in this situation. Over the past 10 years, I, 48M, have experienced a wide range of feelings and situations, and everything has culminated in a manner I never anticipated. My marriage to Laura, the mother of my daughter Emily, marked the beginning of it all many years ago. As high school sweethearts, Laura and I initially seemed to have an unbreakable bond. We were young, optimistic, and prepared to face the world as a team. However, even the strongest relationships may be broken by life, and soon enough, the fissures in our relationship were visible. I grew up in a relatively modest home, but Laura came from a wealthy family and was used to living in luxury. I loved her dearly and did my best to support her the manner she was accustomed to, despite our disagreements. But it was never enough, no matter how hard I tried. Our marriage started to disintegrate as a result of the strain I was under attempting to meet Laura's expectations. The fights increased in frequency and our relationship grew more tense. Laura appeared aloof to me, as though her thoughts were elsewhere. I attempted to get in touch with her to find out what was wrong, but she consistently dismissed me and insisted that everything was okay. Only later, I discovered the devastating fact that Laura had cheated on me several times during our marriage during the divorce proceedings. The realization came to me suddenly. She had been cheating on me the entire time, despite all the sacrifices I made to support our marriage and the many late nights I worked to support our family. Emily, our daughter, was my first priority despite the hurt and betrayal. At the time, she was just 11 years old, and I wanted to do everything I could to support her. However, the divorce deal also dashed that hope. Laura was adamant about making me the antagonist in our tale. She made false accusations against me, including neglect and emotional distance, and even implied possible abuse. However, Laura was persuasive, and she was able to persuade my parents and siblings against me. They all believed her narrative, thinking I must have done something horrible to make her cheat on me. I had the impression that I was alone on an island, and that no one would listen to me. Despite my best efforts, the judge decided in favor of Laura in the grueling legal battle. I was given limited visitation rights, and she was given full custody of Emily. However, Laura ruined even those rare chances to see my daughter. She frequently failed to remember planned visits or pretended that Emily was ill or had other commitments. Laura wouldn't allow me to have any significant influence in her life, even when I offered to drive Emily to school or assist her with her projects. Having always been close to Emily, my family took Laura's side and assisted her in keeping my daughter away from me, and they wanted to take me out of Emily's life. And I had no control over it. Some of the most agonizing years of my life were those that followed. Emily would initially be reluctant to come to me, preferring to stay with her mother, and even though it was painful, I made an effort to comprehend. Ultimately, children tend to favor one parent over the other, don't they? However, it soon became evident that a more malevolent motive was involved. Emily would arrive during our appointments with a litany of complaints about things I allegedly said or did that portrayed me negatively. None of it was true, so I was perplexed. I attempted to discuss it with Laura, but she would either brush it off or change the subject to make it appear like I was overreacting or being paranoid. I made an effort to stay in touch with Emily over the years, but it got harder and harder. Letters were returned unopened, phone calls went unanswered, and Laura and my family were hostile when I tried to visit her. To put it mildly, they all appeared intent on removing me from Emily's life. When Emily was about 13, the worst part happened. She made it clear to me that she no longer wanted to see me. She spoke so icily, as though I had no significance for her. I was heartbroken. I didn't have the heart to put Emily through a convoluted legal struggle, even if I knew Laura had been feeding her lies. She did want to stay with her mother, after all, and it would only get worse if I took her away from her at that point. I grudgingly consented to take a back seat since I didn't want to be the source of any more strife in her life. One of the most difficult choices I've ever had to make was this one. It was a long, long time before she finally realized the truth and came back to me. But I never gave up hope, and that she would. I gradually but surely recovered from that awful time in my life years later. Megan and I clicked right away when we first met. However, due to my prior experiences, we took our time getting to know one another before getting married a while back. We created a life together, and I spent the most of my time with Megan's 2 children. Even while I cherished my new family, I couldn't help but wonder about Emily. How did she feel? What had she turned into? Over the years, I contacted Laura a few times to inquire about Emily. However, she never answered. Though I made an effort to persuade myself that Emily was better off without me, I couldn't help but feel as though I had left her. Then, One day, Emily contacted me without warning. Her letter was brief and straightforward, and she was now 20 years old. She desired to meet and converse. She said that she needed to know certain facts about our family and the reasons I wasn't supporting her. When I read her message, my heart skipped a beat. Although it was unsettling to consider meeting her after all this time, I was determined not to pass up the opportunity to see my daughter. I was both anxious and optimistic. Perhaps this was the time I had been looking forward to for so long. We decided to get together at a peaceful cafe. While I waited for her to arrive, I was really nervous. I barely recognized her when she finally entered. Although she had developed into a stunning young lady, it was impossible to hide the hurt and rage in her eyes. As we sat across from one another, the tension was evident, and it was obvious that she had been carrying a lot of sorrow for a long time. She was looking for answers, and I knew they would be difficult to hear. I inhaled deeply before I started to be honest with her. I didn't hold back. I explained to her how her mother and her relatives had deliberately turned her against me, how they had fabricated every circumstance to paint me as the villain, and how I had made a concerted effort to be involved in her life in spite of everything. I informed her about Laura's adultery and the falsehoods she had propagated during the divorce. I presented the facts of what had transpired over the course of the following several hours. Old court records, emails, and texts that bolstered my account were with me. I wanted Emily to know that I didn't belong to the monster she had been told about me, and that I knew what she had been told all along. As I told Emily the truth about what had transpired, she sat in startled silence. She had grown up thinking that I had abandoned her, that I didn't value her enough to be in her life. It was overwhelming for her to learn the reality. I didn't press her to answer because I could see she was taking it all in. I was aware that this was too much for her to process. Her voice was shaking when she finally said something. She questioned why I never retaliated and why I didn't make a greater effort to remain in her life. I was broken by that question. I had to explain that I believed the best way to protect her was to back off and not get her involved in a legal dispute. Even if it meant she would despise me for a while, I wanted her to have a joyful childhood. In actuality, though, I wished I had fought harder. I felt bad for allowing Laura and her family to steer the story. Emily appeared to be starting to realize the full extent of what had transpired at this point. She was largely upset with her mother, but she was also a bit upset with me. The extent Laura had gone to do order to appear like the better parent astounded her. Emily made the decision that she had to do something. She declared her desire to face her mother and explain everything to everyone. She stood up for herself, which astonished me but also made me proud of her. Emily had changed from the young child I knew 10 years prior. She could protect herself since she was a powerful woman. I was also concerned about the toll this might have on her. When she admitted that she wasn't sure how to go with our relationship, I breathed a sigh of relief. She would love it if we could meet and talk more, but she had grown so accustomed to her father's absence. 2 days later, Laura bombarded me with irate messages and calls. Emily had apparently challenged her with what I had told her. Laura was enraged and accused me of ruining their relationship by turning Emily against her. The next thing Emily did surprised me. She told me over the phone yesterday that she intends to sue Laura for parental alienation. For the emotional harm brought on by years of deceit and manipulation, she wishes to file a lawsuit. Laura keeps phoning me now. She is requesting that I persuade Emily to drop the case, oscillating between threats and entreaties. My family is also contacting me, seeking to get back in touch and make amends. I don't know. On the one hand, I'm glad Emily has discovered the truth at last. However, it was never my intention for things to get this bad. I'm not sure whether I can handle the same mental strain at this time in my life because I have to care for Megan and the kids in addition to Emily. Although I don't want to add to the suffering or drama, I also believe that Laura and my family must take responsibility for their acts. I've been really conflicted, to put it briefly. Emily's desire to stand up against what had been done to her and her pursuit of the truth make me proud of her. I was afraid for her, though. I didn't want her to suffer any more harm than she had previously had because the justice system is cruel, particularly when family members are involved. I attempted to help her from a distance, letting her know that I was there to her any time she needed me, but also allowing her the freedom to make her own decisions. I can't even begin to express the emotional strain Laura and my family are putting on me. Even though it has resulted in this complex scenario, all of this is making me wonder if AITA was right to tell my daughter the truth about her mother and our past. Your feedback and recommendations would be much appreciated. Hello everyone, this is the first update. The worsening of the situation was, to be honest, much anticipated. As expected, since Laura had no concern for anyone around her, any confrontation with her couldn't be simple. I simply didn't know if our kid was included in it. Emily arrived at our house, her eyes stained with tears, following her fight with her mother. She didn't hold back this time. She described all the unpleasant aspects of her life throughout the previous 8 years. Despite having one custody, Laura was obviously unprepared to be a mother, much less take care of a child. Emily explained that Laura wasn't even home half the time. Emily would be left to care for herself while she was away, often for days at a time. Half the time, anyway. Laura was inebriated and unpredictable when she was at home. Emily described the evenings Laura would return home furious, hurling objects, screaming, and once even accusing Emily of being to blame for her own shortcomings and annoyances. As she described these incidents, the loneliness and the fear she must have had, my heart ached. However, the worst was still to come. Emily shared with us two experiences that still troubled her. She was 13 the first time, and Laura had abandoned her for the weekend without providing her with food or cash. Emily attempted to prepare a meal for herself, however she ended up severely burning her hand. Even though she was in a lot of agony, Laura didn't answer the phone when she tried to call her. Emily, who was only a child, had to walk with her hand wrapped in a towel to the closest hospital. She was alone, afraid, and in pain as she waited for hours in the emergency room before a nurse saw her and came to her aid. Emily showed me her hand scar, which serves as a constant reminder of her mother's abuse. It was worse the second time. Laura, who was 15, had been drinking excessively for weeks. Emily made every effort to stay away from Laura, but one evening she became aggressive. In her wrath, she flung a glass at Emily, and it smashed against her leg, causing a serious cut. Despite Emily's bleeding and shock, Laura yelled at her to clean up the mess rather than offering assistance. Terrified, Emily covered her leg with an old shirt and headed back to the hospital, where she ultimately required stitches. I experienced a mixture of grief and rage as Emily told these tales that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Sadness for Emily's suffering and rage at Laura for causing our daughter to go through this nightmare. She didn't. Why deserve any of this? She was only a child. She wasn't worthy of being abandoned, hurt, and afraid. The one person who was meant to protect her shouldn't have treated her like a burden. This was an actual example of mental and physical abuse. Ironically, the things she accused me of doing to separate my kid from me ended up becoming part of her daily routine. And if Laura had simply allowed me to look after my baby, all of this could have been prevented. Emily may have had a typical, contented upbringing if she hadn't been so preoccupied with her own ego and resentment. Listened to Emily all night long with Megan. We ensured she was comfortable and aware of her safety. Megan was particularly consoling, holding Emily's hand and telling her that she had nothing to do with anything. I could understand Emily's need for someone to reassure her that she was loved, and that she was important. Emily then apologized to me in a heartbreaking and bittersweet moment. She had nothing to apologize for and didn't need to. But she did. She apologized for pushing me away, for not recognizing the truth sooner, and for believing all the lies her mother had taught her. Her voice broke as she told me how much she had missed me over the years, and how frequently she had pondered what life could have been like if she had moved in with me. I told her how much I had also missed her, and how I had never stopped loving and thinking about her. It was a bittersweet time because, although hearing her apologies was terrible, it also meant that we were finally getting back in touch after all these years apart. She didn't need to apologize to me for anything because she was only a victim. I also realized that I had had enough of dodging family problems and playing it safe. Even if it meant going to court with my ex-wife, I was determined to obtain my daughter the apology and compensation she was due because her welfare was at risk. After a long night of consoling and chatting, Emily and I came up with a plan the next morning. We planned to confront my family about all of Emily's experiences, including all of the lies, neglect, and abuse she had endured. I had had enough of them acting like the ideal family, while allowing Laura to ruin Emily's early years. The medical documents, the text messages, and even some old voicemails from Laura that Emily had preserved provided us with the evidence we required. It was time to reveal the truth and make them aware of the full price of their collusion. Emily was clearly anxious, but I also noticed a resolve in her eyes that I had never noticed before. She was prepared to confront them and defend herself, and I would be right there by her side. Finally, we were going to receive the justice we both earned, and I was confident that we would deal with whatever came up. You guys will be the first to know about anything that occurs. I appreciate your consideration of my predicament and your insightful remarks. It's very important. This is obviously not the end, so I'll be back with updates. Update 2. Hi everyone. I hope all is well with you. Do you recall the family conflict Emily and I were planning? That did occur, and it was undoubtedly an eventful one. I could see their astonishment as soon as we entered the house after my daughter and I made the decision to pay them a surprise visit. They were unable to fully comprehend the sight of us reunited after all these years. They never imagined that the years of deceit, manipulation, and remoteness could be reversed so quickly. However, here we were, standing together, prepared to face them. As soon as the initial shock subsided, they hurried to put on their typical show of worry. The first person to speak was my mother. She asked Emily if I had offended her in any way. voice brimming with fake concern. The insinuation hurt, because it demonstrated how strongly they had believed Laura's story, not because I was interested in what they thought of me. It was disgusting to consider that I would hurt my own daughter, but they appeared to believe it without doubt. Maybe since it was easier for them to defend their own behavior, they were eager to assume the worst about me. However, Emily was no longer the terrified, perplexed youngster they had known, and I was no longer Laura. Emily moved forward before I could answer. I was proud of her steady voice, which was full of quiet strength, since they had done nothing to assist her. Throughout the years, she admonished them to stop acting as though they cared. She spoke without hesitating or faltering. She criticized them for their indifference, for allowing Laura to abuse and neglect her, and for helping to ruin her upbringing. I observed my siblings and parents attempting to hide their uneasiness. Fake worry gave way to something more like displeasure on their faces. They disliked confrontation, particularly from Emily, whom they still viewed as a child who should to be appreciative of the meager care they had given her. However, Emily was no longer a child, and she had no interest in their vacuous excuses or apologies. I read some comments that questioned how Laura was able to so effortlessly turn my own family against me. Our relationship had always been difficult, entangled in years of unsolved problems and long suppressed animosity. There was a constant sense of rivalry between my siblings and me that ruined any possibility of a true link. As a result, we had never been close. Rather of promoting togetherness, my parents had chosen a side, siding with the child who would be most helpful to them at the moment. They viewed Laura's proposal to divorce me as a chance to vent their long-standing animosity at me. They were more concerned with making amends and seeing me brought down to earth than they were with the effect it would have on Emily and me. As Emily described all that had transpired, including Laura's abandonment, injuries, and trauma, I could see the uneasiness showing on their faces as they turned a blind eye. They weren't used to this kind of challenge, particularly from someone they had long undervalued. The remarks weren't the only thing that hurt. It was Emily's refusal to let them off the hook with their typical platitudes and her keeping them accountable. We didn't share everything we had, of course. We didn't have to reveal every card at once. We had text messages, medical records, and other information that could quickly dismantle their meticulously crafted story. We just disclosed enough information to demonstrate that we were serious, and that this wasn't only an emotional outburst, but for the time being, we kept the majority of it secret. Things were going to grow much more serious, and this was a warning, a proclamation that we were done playing by their rules. We didn't wait for a response before leaving the residence. They could say nothing that would make a difference. There was nothing that could reverse the years of suffering and disregard they had permitted. Emily gave us one last message as we were leaving. She instructed them to give it to Laura, to inform her that she had better prepare for the fact that we would be bringing a very heavy case. As we walked away, there was a deafening quiet that was laden with the weight of what lay ahead in unspoken words. There was no going back once Emily and I had drawn our line in the sand. The family had always prospered from keeping us apart and at odds with one another, but now that Emily and I were standing together, they would be the ones to bear the repercussions. You have all offered me some of the best counsel, and you are all aware that I read every comment on a regular basis. Your help is greatly appreciated. Update 3 Hi. I would want to express my gratitude to everyone who has followed along and provided guidance and encouragement. Although the last few days have been among the most difficult of my life, I believe that a path ahead is finally in sight. So get ready for a long one. Immediately after the event at my family's house, I called one of our attorneys. Laura had done a lot to Emily and to me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. However, Emily shocked me when I suggested taking legal action. She had no desire to proceed with any legal proceedings. By no means was it that she was forgiving her mother or that she didn't care. Emily had different priorities now that she had experienced so much. She had ambitious hopes for the future and a flourishing academic life. She couldn't afford to postpone that in order to file a lawsuit against her mother. I was really proud of her as her father. Despite everything that had happened to her, she remained a bright, strong young woman with a bright future. I couldn't help but feel conflicted, though. There was a part of me that wanted Laura to pay for her deeds and deal with the fallout from the suffering she had brought about. It was one thing to ruin my life, but I couldn't forgive Emily for being hurt and deprived of a typical, contented childhood. But I honored Emily's desires. Her viewpoint was valued here, unlike at her mother's, and I would always consider that while making choices. Something else occurred while we were negotiating all of this. An envelope was delivered to our door by one of Laura's neighbors a day or two later. The neighbor clarified that Laura had been instructed to deliver the mail to us because she was going out of town for a time. I accepted the packet and thanked the neighbor, not knowing what to anticipate. There was a note from Laura in the envelope. It was lengthy and full of attempts to defend her behavior as well as apologies. She wrote about how things went south after I left, how she lost her job, and how she felt extremely alone. After a while, she obtained another job, but it paid poorly, and her depression worsened. She said she never intended to injure Emily, and that she was simply so lost and overcome by her own suffering that drinking became her coping mechanism. Laura continued to describe more of her hardships, attempting to depict a lady driven to the edge by uncontrollable events. However, all I could think about, while reading, was how meaningless it all sounded. Laura was obviously attempting to justify her actions by portraying herself as a victim of her own circumstances. However, her treatment of Emily could not be justified by any amount of hardship. She begged us not to go to court as she concluded the letter. She volunteered to pay whatever we felt was appropriate as compensation for the harm she had caused, and, as a courtesy, agreed to avoid Emily. I could see the sadness in Emily's eyes as she read the letter after I gave it to her. This wasn't the resolution she deserved, and it wasn't the apology she had desired. What type of mother abandons her child in this way, and then believes that financial gain would somehow compensate for the years of suffering and disregard? For Emily, the realization was devastating, and I was aware that she needed time to take it all in. I gave Emily room, knowing that when she was ready, she would get in touch with me or Megan. Emily soon found solace in my wife Megan, whom she could confide in without fear of repercussions. Emily quickly bonded with Megan's kids and became like family to all of us. Even though I wanted to help, I knew Emily would benefit more from Megan's perspective and support as she processed everything. After some time, Emily approached me with her choice. She has no desire to seek legal action. She didn't want to drag things out any further or become embroiled in a contentious legal dispute. She desired to leave the past behind and begin anew, concentrating on her future and herself. Even though I wanted justice for Emily, I understood that this was the right decision, and she was prepared to go on. She had lived with the consequences of her mother's errors long enough. She needed to live her life according to her own rules. With Emily's choice, we entered a new phase of our lives. She began to give her studies greater attention, directing her efforts into her dreams and ambitions. As she moved through this new stage of her life, Megan and I remained there to help her in every way we could, providing direction and inspiration. This feels like a dream to me. It couldn't have ended any better, and I have 3 children and a wonderful wife at my side. We had eventually found our way back to one another after a protracted and agonizing journey. And the real triumph in all of this was that above all. Again, I want to thank everyone for their support. It's been quite the journey. However, I believe we're at last headed in the right direction. Goodbye.